May 1944, Kent, England. In a muddy field 3 miles from the White Cliffs of Dover, Corporal Tommy Henderson worked with the Fort Garry Horse, a Canadian tank group. He stood next to what looked like a huge 33-ton Sherman tank. The morning sun shined on its green army paint. Mud covered its tracks. Oil stains marked the ground under it. From 20 feet away, it looked completely real. But when Henderson put his hands on the top part and pushed, the whole tank rocked gently in the spring breeze. It weighed only 63 pounds. It was made of rubber canvas stretched over a wooden frame and filled with air from a gas-powered air pump, and it was about to help win the war. Henderson was part of a secret Canadian group working with British engineers to put out hundreds of these blow-up tanks across southeast England. The mission was simple but very important. Make the Germans believe a huge invasion army was gathering near Dover, getting ready to attack across the narrowest part of the English Channel to Calais in France. Make Hitler send his tank divisions there to wait. Meanwhile, the real invasion army would gather 200 miles west and attack Normandy instead. Everything depended on fooling German spy pilots into taking photos of fake tanks and reporting them as real. If the trick failed, if the Germans figured out the truth, thousands of Allied soldiers would die on the beaches. The problem was huge and scary. Everyone knew an invasion was coming. The Germans knew it. Hitler knew it. The only questions were when and where. German spies had been watching England for months, trying to find out where the huge Allied army would cross the Channel. They flew spy missions whenever Allied fighter planes gave them a chance. Every photograph was studied by expert spy officers in Berlin who had been learning about Allied tricks since 1939. They counted tanks in sky photos. They watched troop movements. They spotted unit patches and vehicle markings, and they were very good at their jobs. By March of 1944, German spies had correctly found dozens of real Allied units gathering in southern England. The picture was becoming dangerously clear. If the Germans discovered the real landing place, they could position their tank divisions at exactly the right beaches and wait. Allied planners had done the math, and the numbers were nightmare fuel. If German tanks were positioned correctly, when the invasion came, deaths in the first wave could jump from 30% to 70%. That meant instead of 30,000 men killed or wounded on D-Day, it could be 70,000. The invasion could fail in blood and chaos within hours. Years of planning would be wasted. The war could drag on until 1947 or longer. Millions more would die. The difference between winning and losing depended on whether the Germans believed a lie. British and American commanders had tried every normal trick method they knew. They built wooden fake tanks and painted camouflage patterns on canvas stretched over truck frames. They built fake headquarters buildings with plywood walls. They even hired Hollywood movie set designers to create fake landing boats from wood and canvas. But these early attempts had serious problems. Wooden tanks were too heavy, weighing 240 pounds each. Moving them needed trucks and created obvious tire tracks that looked nothing like tank tracks. Setting them up took 4 hours with a full crew. And worst of all, they looked fake in photographs. German photo experts spotted them easily. The shadows fell wrong. The weathering looked too perfect. Real tanks left specific types of tracks and oil stains. Fake tanks sat too perfect, too clean. At the main Allied headquarters in London, officers argued desperately about how to solve the problem. One British general wanted to move actual divisions to southeast England. to make the trick look real. But that would weaken the real invasion army gathering in Portsmouth and Southampton. An American colonel suggested building even bigger and better wooden fakes, but that just meant more obvious fakes that German experts would spot. The normal solutions were not working, and day was coming whether they were ready or not. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. British engineers working in North Africa had tried blow-up tanks during trick operations against Rommel in 1942 and 1943. The early versions were rough, just rubber balloons painted green. But they had proven one important point. From the air at 20,000 feet, a well-made blow-up could fool a camera if you got the details right. The key was not making it perfect. The key was making it look real enough, in a photograph taken from 4 miles up, by a plane traveling 300 miles per hour. Human eyes seeing it on the ground would know right away it was fake, but German pilots in planes taking quick photos through breaks in cloud cover would see only shapes and shadows. In January 1944, British and Canadian engineers formed a team to mass-produce military-grade blow-up fakes. They studied real Sherman tanks in tiny detail. Every measurement had to match exactly. A real Sherman measured 19 feet 2 inches long and 8 feet 7 inches wide. The blow-up had to match those numbers perfectly, or German photo experts would notice the sizes were wrong. Inside the rubber shell, they added 14 wooden support sticks positioned at exact angles. These sticks were very important. They held the fabric in exactly the right shape so shadows fell correctly. A real tank has hard edges, sharp corners, a gun barrel at a specific angle. When sun hits it from above, the shadow has a particular look that trained experts recognize. The sticks made sure the blow-up cast the same shadows. But measurements and shadows were not enough. The Canadians added the dirt and wear details that made the trick work. They studied real Canadian tank units training in England and noticed how tanks got dirty. Mud splashed in specific patterns on the tracks and lower body. Dust settled on flat surfaces. Rain created streaks down the sides. Oil and grease leaked from hatches and left dark stains. They painted all of it onto the rubber, making each blow-up tank look like it had been in the field for weeks. They even used bulldozers to create realistic tank tracks in the mud around each fake position, carving deep treads that matched how 33 tons of steel would press down the earth. The Canadians were perfect for this mission. 1st Canadian Army had been stationed in southeast England since late 1943. Canadian soldiers were already easy to see in Kent and Sussex. German spies had spotted Canadian unit patches and identified Canadian divisions in the area. The Germans expected Canadians to be part of any invasion army. So when Canadian engineers started positioning blow-up tanks in fields near Dover, it fit perfectly with what German spies already believed. The fake army would look like a real buildup of Canadian tank strength, preparing to cross from Dover to Calais, exactly what the Germans feared most. Corporal Henderson looked across the field, where his crew had just finished setting up 12 blow-up Shermans in fighting positions. From where he stood, they looked ridiculous. He could see the fabric rippling slightly in the wind. He knew each one could be lifted by 4 men and carried away. But he also knew German spy pilots would be flying over any day now, cameras clicking, taking photos that would go back to Berlin. And in those photos, shot from 20,000 feet through breaks in the clouds, these rubber tanks would look like the real thing. They would look like Canada was bringing its tank divisions to Kent. they would look like an invasion army gathering. And that lie, that carefully made visual trick, could save thousands of Canadian lives when the real invasion came at a beach the Germans were not watching. Corporal Henderson found his key partner in Lieutenant William Thornton of the Royal Canadian Engineers, a practical man who had worked as a stage manager at the Stratford Festival in Ontario before the war. Thornton understood something most military officers did not. Tricks were not about creating perfect copies. They were about controlling what the audience saw and making them believe what you wanted them to believe. Together they worked through February and March of 1944 in a warehouse near Shepperton Studios, the same place where British film crews had once built movie sets. Now, instead of building castles and pirate ships, they were building an army made of rubber and air. The technical problems were harder than Henderson expected. A real Sherman tank was not just a simple shape. It had hundreds of small details that made it recognizable. The top part sat at a specific angle. The gun barrel stuck out exactly 42 inches beyond the turret front. The track wheels had a particular spacing pattern. The exhaust pipe sat in exact positions on the back deck. The antenna mount was positioned 12 inches behind the commander's hatch. Miss any of these details, and German photo experts would spot the fake immediately. These experts had been studying Allied equipment for years. They knew what a Sherman looked like from every angle. They could identify different versions by small differences in turret shape or track design. Thornton and his team settled on a 3-layer rubberized canvas material, exactly 1/8 of a millimeter thick. Any thinner and the fabric would tear when inflated. Any thicker and it would be too stiff to fold properly and too heavy to move easily. Inside the shell, the 14 wooden support sticks were positioned using measurements taken from actual Sherman tanks parked at Canadian training grounds. Each stick was cut to exact sizes. The one supporting the turret edge had to be positioned at exactly 37 degrees from straight up and down. The sticks holding the gun barrel shape had to keep a 1-degree upward angle to match how real Shermans carried their guns. Get these angles wrong by even 2 degrees, and the shadows in sky photographs would look wrong to trained German eyes. They painted the rubber skin using exact color, matching Green Army paint mixed to the same formula the Canadian Army used on real tanks. But Thornton added something the original British designs lacked. He studied Canadian tank units that had been training in muddy English fields for months and photographed how real tanks weathered. He noticed mud always splashed highest on the left front fender where the left track threw it. He saw that oil leaked from engine areas and created specific drip patterns down the back body. He observed that rain washed dust off curved surfaces, but left it in sunken areas around hatches and viewing ports. He photographed rust patterns on bare metal edges where paint had chipped away. Then he copied all of it on the blow-ups. His team painted fake mud splashes using darker paint mixed with actual dirt from Kent fields. They created oil stain patterns using black paint thinned with kerosene. They added rust effects around painted hatch edges using orange and brown colors. They even painted on the worn patches where tank crews climbed on and off the body, areas where boots had rubbed away the paint over time. When they finished, each blow-up tank looked like it had been in field service for 6 months. From the ground up close, you could tell it was fake. From 20,000 feet through a camera lens, it looked like a well-used Canadian Sherman tank. But Thornton had no official permission to use these fakes yet. In early March, the main headquarters was still debating whether blow-up tricks would work against German spies. Some officers worried the Germans would spot them easily. Others argued that without German aircraft flying regular spy missions over England, there was no point in building physical fakes at all. Thornton decided to run an unofficial test. On March 14th, he and Henderson set up 6 blow-up Shermans in a field near Camberley, mixing them with real tanks from the Canadian Armored Corps. They positioned them in standard defensive hull-down positions with only the turrets visible above earth mounds. Then Thornton called in a favor from the Royal Canadian Air Force. He asked spy pilots to photograph the Camberley position exactly as they would photograph German positions in France. High-altitude photos from 20,000 feet. Standard spy cameras. No special instructions. The pilots flew the mission on March 16th, a clear morning with good visibility. They took 47 photographs of the area and brought the film back for development. 2 days later, Thornton sat with 3 Royal Air Force photo readers in a small office at RAF Benson. These men were experts trained to study every detail in spy photographs. Their job was to look at photos of enemy territory and identify real equipment versus fakes. They had seen thousands of images. They knew every German trick for hiding real tanks and every Allied trick for making fake ones. Thornton watched their faces as they examined the Camberley photographs through magnifying glasses. One reader tapped a spot on the photo with his pencil. Sherman tank here. Hull down position behind this mound. Well hidden but visible. He marked it with a Grace pencil. Another reader pointed to 3 more shapes. 3 more here spread across this tree line. Standard defensive spacing. I'd estimate this is a full tank troop. Probably 12 vehicles total in this sector. He marked those as well. 4 of the 6 blow-ups had been identified as real tanks by expert photo readers. Thornton let them finish their study. Then he told them the truth. 4 of those tanks you marked are rubber balloons filled with air. They weigh 63 pounds each. 2 men can carry one. The room went silent. One reader actually laughed, thinking it was a joke. Then he saw Thornton's serious expression and stopped laughing. He picked up the magnifying glass and examined the photographs again, searching for any sign that would show which tanks were real and which were rubber. Even knowing the truth, even looking specifically for signs of trickery, he could not tell the difference in the photographs. Word of the test reached Air Vice Marshal Trafford Mallory within 48 hours. Mallory commanded Allied air forces preparing for the invasion and understood the war value of tricks. When he saw the test photographs and the photo readers' reports confirming they had been fooled, he recognized this could change the entire invasion plan. If British experts looking specifically for signs of fakery could not spot blow-up tanks in photographs, German experts looking at stolen spy photos would have no chance. This was not just a clever trick. This was a weapon that could multiply Allied strength without building a single real tank. Mallory went directly to General Dwight Eisenhower with the evidence. He brought the photographs, the readers' study, and Thornton's cost numbers. A blow-up Sherman tank cost $11 to make. A real Sherman cost $7,800. For the price of one real tank, they could build over 700 fakes. Eisenhower studied the photos and asked the important question. How many can we deploy before D-Day? Thornton had already worked out the answer. with Canadian and British production places working together. They could make 600 blow-up tanks by May. They could create the visual appearance of an entire tank division, 12,000 men and 300 tanks, using fewer than 100 real soldiers to put out and maintain the fakes. Everything depended on fooling German spy pilots into photographing fake tanks and reporting them as real. In late March, Thornton received official permission to go ahead with full-scale production and deployment. Canadian engineers and infantrymen began arriving at Dover from units across England. Most were never told the complete truth about their mission. They received orders to report to a special camouflage unit working on trick operations. They were shown how to unpack the blow-ups from their canvas duffel bags, how to connect the gas-powered air pumps, how to position the wooden support sticks correctly during inflation. They learned that each tank took exactly 14 minutes to inflate and position properly. They were told that being exact mattered more than speed. That lives depended on making every detail look exactly right. The first major deployment began on April 18th. 40 Canadian soldiers moved into positions across Kent and Sussex with trucks loaded with rolled-up rubber tanks. They worked mainly at night to avoid being seen by locals. Each crew of 4 men could handle one blow-up. They would arrive at a pre-selected position after dark, unroll the tank, connect the air pump, and inflate it. While it inflated, other crew members used bulldozers to create realistic tank tracks leading to the position. They scattered equipment around the site, empty fuel cans, ammunition boxes marked with Canadian unit symbols, camouflage, netting that was deliberately worn and dirty. Small details that made the scene look like a real tank position that crews were trying to hide. By April 25th, Fort 8 blow-up Sherman tanks sat in fighting positions across southeast England. They were arranged in groups matching how Canadian tank units would actually deploy. 4 tank troops, 3 troops to a squadron, 3 squadrons to a regiment. The spacing matched Canadian rules. The positioning matched defensive tactics. Everything looked exactly like 1st Canadian Army was gathering tank strength near Dover in preparation for a channel crossing. German spy pilots took the bait. On April 27th, a lone German Fokker Wolf Fo-190 managed to slip through Allied fighter patrols and flew a high-speed run over Kent at 22,000 feet. The pilot's cameras clicked rapidly, capturing dozens of images before British Spitfires forced him to run away. The film went back to Germany. Spy officers in Berlin developed it, studied it carefully, and filed their reports. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted the German signals and intelligence that followed. The reports were clear and confident. German spies had identified a large Canadian tank gathering in Kent, estimated strength of at least 2 tank regiments, possibly more. The rubber balloons filled with air had been listed as real 33-ton steel tanks by the best photo experts in the German military. By early May, over 100 blow-up tanks sat in positions across southeast England. Canadian soldiers moved them occasionally, creating the impression that units were shifting positions and training for an invasion. They used bulldozers to create fresh tank tracks. They set up fake maintenance areas with camouflage netting. They even positioned blow-up trucks and jeeps around the tank sites to complete the trick. Every detail added to the trick. Every element made the fake Canadian tank force look more real. British spies monitored German responses obsessively. The intercepted communication showed the trick working beyond anyone's hopes. German experts had complete confidence in their assessments. They knew Canadian tanks were in Kent because their spy photos showed them clearly. They knew the force was growing because new photos showed additional tanks arriving. They reported these findings directly to German High Command. Hitler and his generals studied the spy reports and made their war decisions based on it. The German 15th Army, 18 divisions, including powerful tank units with Tiger and Panther tanks, remained positioned near Calais. Those divisions stayed there watching the coast opposite Dover, waiting for the Canadian tank attack they believed was coming, and it was all because young Canadians in muddy English fields kept inflating rubber tanks and making them look real enough to fool cameras in the sky. The numbers told the story of what happened next. In March of 1944, German spies assessed Calais as the most likely invasion site with 72% probability. They based this assessment on geography, military logic, and early spy reports showing Allied buildup in southeast England. By June 5th, the day before D-Day, that assessment had climbed to 87% certainty. German High Command spy report specifically cited photographic evidence of Canadian tank gatherings in Kent, with estimated strength of 300 tanks and supporting vehicles. Every single one of those tanks was rubber and air. Every vehicle in those spy photographs was a blow-up fake positioned and maintained by Canadian soldiers. The trick had completely changed German understanding of where the invasion would strike. Production and deployment of fake equipment ramped up dramatically as D-Day got closer. By late May, British factories and Canadian engineering units had produced and deployed 5.74 blow-up tanks across southeast England. These were not just Shermans. The inventory included blow-up Churchill tanks, blow-up artillery pieces, blow-up supply trucks, and blow-up jeeps. But the trick went far beyond the blow-ups themselves. Thornton and his Canadian crews created complete fake tank parks and motor pools. They positioned the blow-up vehicles in exact military formations. They used bulldozers to carve deep track patterns in the mud connecting each position, making it look like tanks had been moving between locations during training exercises. They scattered empty fuel drums and ammunition boxes around each site. They set up camouflage netting that looked worn and weathered. They even created fake laundry lines with uniforms hanging to dry, suggesting tank crews were living in field positions nearby. The Canadians also built fake convoys along the roads of Kent. These were the most visible part of the trick. Blow-up trucks were positioned on roadsides in groups of 20 or 30, arranged to look like military convoys that had pulled over for rest stops. Canadian soldiers would occasionally move these fake convoys a few miles down the road, creating the impression of constant military traffic moving toward Dover and the coast. German spy flights photographed these convoys repeatedly. The spy reports described heavy Canadian military traffic consistent with a major force preparing for water landing operations. At the same time, the Americans deployed their own physical tricks using their 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the unit that would become famous as the Ghost Army. The American approach was similar, but focused on different areas. They used blow-ups extensively in France after D-Day to pretend entire divisions were moving to different locations, drawing German forces away from real American positions. But during the pre-invasion trick in England, the Canadian-led operations in Kent and Sussex formed the primary visual part of the fake First United States Army group that German spies believed was preparing to invade Calais. Before the Canadian Ghost Army created this visual trick. The situation had been increasingly desperate. The Allies needed to gather their real invasion force along the south coast of England, between Portsmouth and Plymouth. That was where the embarkation ports were located. That was where the ships and landing craft were staged. But gathering 39 divisions, hundreds of thousands of men, and thousands of real tanks in that area made them vulnerable to German spies. You cannot hide that much military force. The camps were too large. The tank parks were too obvious. The supply dumps stretched for miles. Even without regular sky spy missions, German agents and spy analysis would eventually identify where the real army was gathering. Normal military tricks had proven too limited. Standard rules said you hide your real forces and create fake forces elsewhere to draw enemy attention. But hiding entire armies was impossible in southern England. The area was too small, too populated, too closely watched. Moving real units back and forth to create confusion exhausted the troops and disrupted invasion preparations. Before the blow-up tricks, Allied planners had faced what seemed like an impossible problem. They needed Germans looking away from Normandy, but they had no good way to make that happen. The blow-up Ghost Army changed everything. Now the Allies could show Germans a huge tank force in southeast England while gathering the real invasion force in the southwest. The Germans would see both through their spy channels, but they would believe the visible force in the southeast near Dover was the main invasion threat because it was positioned at the logical crossing point to Calais. As May turned into June, German spy efforts got stronger. German flights over England remained dangerous because Allied fighters controlled the skies, but German pilots made desperate high-speed runs whenever weather gave them chances. On May 23rd, 3 German spy aircraft got through Allied air defenses and photographed positions across Kent before being driven off. The film showed the Canadian tank gatherings clearly. On May 30th, another German flight photographed the Dover area and captured images of the fake convoys positioned along coastal roads. Every photograph reinforced German belief that 1st Canadian Army and other Allied units were gathering for an invasion of Calais. The impact showed up in specific, measurable German military decisions. On June 6th, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the German 15th Army remained in position defending Calais. That army included 18 full divisions, nearly 200,000 men. Among them were the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler with heavy Tiger tanks and the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend with Panther tanks. These were elite units with combat veterans and the best equipment Germany could provide. They stayed in position near Calais, weapons ready, eyes on the coast, waiting for the Canadian tank force they believed was preparing to cross from Dover. Their orders were clear. The spy evidence showed huge tank gatherings in Kent. Normandy was likely a trick. The real attack would come at Calais. Do not move until the actual threat appears. On June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, German High Command held an urgent strategy meeting. Spy officers presented their latest analysis. Spy photographs from late May still showed Canadian tank gatherings in Kent. The units had not moved. Ground spies from agents reported continued activity around Dover. Radio intercepts suggested 1st United States Army Group remained in southeast England. The conclusion seemed unavoidable. Normandy was a fake designed to draw German forces away from the real invasion route. The Canadians had not launched their attack yet, because they were waiting for the right moment. probably waiting for German reserves to commit to Normandy before striking the weakly defended Calais sector. Hitler agreed completely with this assessment. He had been predicting the main invasion would come at Calais for months. The spy reports confirmed his war thinking. He ordered the 15th Army to remain in position. The tank divisions stayed where they were, more than 300 kilometers from the actual fighting in Normandy. On June 13th, a full week into the battle for Normandy, the situation remained unchanged. German spies continued to report that 1st United States Army Group and its Canadian tank units were still positioned in southeast England, still preparing, still threatening Calais. The blow-up tanks remained in their positions, still being photographed by occasional German spy flights, still looking real in every image. The Canadian crews maintaining the trick worked under enormous pressure. They knew Allied soldiers were dying on Normandy beaches. They knew their rubber tanks were the only thing keeping German tanks away from those beaches. Every morning they checked each blow up for damage. Wind could tear the fabric. Rain could wash away the painted dirt that made them look real. They repaired tiers using rubber cement patches. They repainted mud patterns and oil stains. They moved tanks occasionally to new positions and used bulldozers to create fresh track marks. They maintained the trick with careful attention to detail, because one mistake, one blow, up that obviously looked fake in a German photograph could unravel the entire trick. British spies monitored German communications constantly through their ultra-decryption program. The intercepted messages revealed something almost unbelievable. The Germans had not just fallen for the blow-up tank trick. They had built their entire defensive strategy around it. Every German spy report about Allied invasion plans mentioned the Canadian tank gatherings in Kent. Every war assessment rated Calais as the more likely target than Normandy specifically, because of the tank's strength shown in spy photographs. The fake army had become more real to German commanders than the actual Allied forces fighting in France. The Germans trusted their spy photos completely because sky photography had been reliable throughout the war. German photo experts were among the best in the world. The idea that an entire tank force could be faked using blow-up fakes had never seriously occurred to them. By June 25th, 19 days after D-Day, the Normandy beachhead was secure. Allied forces had pushed inland, captured key towns including Corentin and Bayeux, and established strong defensive positions. The immediate danger of being pushed back into the sea had passed. Allied spy officers assessed what the Canadian blow-up trick had accomplished. They calculated that German reinforcement of Normandy had been delayed by at least 15 days, possibly as long as 3 weeks. During those crucial weeks, 2 full-tank divisions with approximately 400 real tanks sat idle 300 kilometers from the fighting, defending against rubber tanks filled with air. General Eisenhower, who had approved the Canadian blow-up tank program back in March, wrote about its impact in classified reports to the combined chiefs of staff. His assessment was direct and powerful. The dummy equipment deployed by Canadian forces in southeast England successfully fixed substantial German armored reserves in the Calais area throughout the critical initial phase of operations in Normandy. This deception was instrumental in allowing Allied forces to establish and expand the beachhead without facing the full weight of German panzer strength. The cost-benefit ratio of this trick operation was extraordinary. Military experts later estimated that the blow-up trick which cost roughly 7,000 in materials and manufacturing, had the same war effect as deploying 3 actual tank divisions, which would have cost over 84 million and required 15,000 additional soldiers. But the trick did not end with the beachhead. Canadian crews kept the blow up tanks in position through July. They continued maintaining them, moving them occasionally, creating the appearance that 1st United States Army Group remained active and threatening. German spy flights continued photographing the positions when they could get through Allied air defenses. German spies kept analyzing the photos and reporting that Canadian tank units remained in Kent. It was not until July 29th, nearly 8 full weeks after D-Day, that German High Command finally accepted the truth. The huge tank force they had been watching and fearing for months did not exist. The hundreds of tanks in spy photographs were rubber fakes. The threat to Calais was imaginary. By the time Germans realized they had been fooled by blow up tanks and fake convoys, maintained by a few hundred Canadian soldiers, Allied armies had broken out of Normandy and were racing across France. Paris would be freed within a month. The war in Western Europe was effectively decided, and it had all started with Canadian soldiers in muddy English fields, inflating rubber tanks and making them look real enough to fool the cameras in German spy planes flying overhead. The blow-up tank technology pioneered by Canadian and British forces in 1944 did not disappear after D-Day. The techniques became classified military rules studied and improved by spy agencies for decades. By 1952, NATO established formal training programs in physical battlefield tricks, teaching new generations of soldiers how to deploy dummy equipment that could fool spy missions. The materials improved significantly over the years. Early Cold War blow-ups used stronger synthetic rubbers that could withstand harsh weather. By the 1960s, designers added metal parts that created radar signals matching real vehicles, making the fakes effective against electronic detection as well as visual spy missions. But the basic rule remained exactly what Corporal Henderson and Lieutenant Thornton had demonstrated in Kent. Make the enemy see what you want them to see, and they will position their forces based on that false picture. Corporal Tommy Henderson went home to Winnipeg when the war ended in 1945. He traded his uniform for civilian clothes and returned to his pre-war job as a construction worker. In a small ceremony at Canadian Forces Base Shiloh that fewer than 30 people attended, he received the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal along with hundreds of other veterans. There was no special recognition for his trick work. The citation mentioned service with Canadian engineering units in England and France, but gave no details about blow-up tanks or fake armies. The Canadian government kept the full story classified for decades. They did not want other countries knowing the details of how the trick had worked. The techniques were too valuable to reveal. So Henderson kept the secret, went back to building houses and office buildings, and lived a quiet life in Manitoba. He died in 1987 at the age of 71. His obituary in the Winnipeg Free Press mentioned his construction career and his wartime service with the Royal Canadian Engineers, but said nothing specific about the Ghost Army. The complete truth about his contribution did not become public until 1996, when the British government declassified the Operation Fortitude records and historians began piecing together Canada's crucial role. That long secrecy meant Henderson and thousands of other Canadian soldiers who worked on the blow-up tricks never received proper recognition during their lifetimes. No monuments were built to honor them. No history books mentioned their names in the decades immediately after the war. They were not celebrated as heroes because the public did not know what they had done. Most of the soldiers who deployed and maintained the fake tanks returned to ordinary civilian jobs. Some worked in construction. Others became farmers or factory workers. A few stayed in the Canadian military, but even they could never tell anyone about the operation that had mattered most. Henderson rarely discussed the war, even with his family. When his grandchildren asked what he did during the fighting, he would smile and say he worked with tanks. That was technically true, but it missed the extraordinary impact those rubber tanks had on the invasion success. But the technology he helped deploy kept proving its worth long after he returned to civilian life. In 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, Israeli armored forces used blow-up tank fakes extensively in the Sinai Desert. They positioned fake tanks in forward positions, while real tank units moved to flanking positions, under cover of darkness. Egyptian forces relying on sky spy missions and forward observers reported huge Israeli tank gatherings where only blow-ups sat. Egyptian artillery units spent thousands of shells destroying rubber fakes, while real Israeli tanks attacked from unexpected directions. The tactic worked because it followed exactly the rule the Canadians had proven in 1944. Control what the enemy's spy missions see. Control where the enemy commits his forces. In 1982, during the Falklands War, British forces deployed blow-up helicopters and vehicles on ships approaching the islands. Argentine spy aircraft photographed these fakes and reported them as genuine military assets. Argentine commanders gave anti-aircraft resources to defend against helicopter attacks that were actually coming from different directions. The blow-up fakes, descendants of the technology developed for D-Day, helped British forces achieve tactical surprise despite operating at the end of a supply line that stretched 8,000 miles from England. The technology became incredibly sophisticated by the end of the 20th century. In 1991, during the Gulf War, coalition forces deployed more than 300 blow-up fakes across Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. These were not simple rubber shells like the 1944 versions. Modern blow-ups included radar reflectors made from metal mesh that created electronic signals matching real tanks. They had heat generators that created heat signals visible to infrared sensors. They even had remote-controlled systems that could move antennas and turrets slightly, pretending the small movements of real armored vehicles. Iraqi forces using Soviet-made spy satellites and aerial surveillance identified these fake positions as real coalition armor. Iraqi artillery and missile units targeted the fake forces, wasting thousands of rounds on targets that did not exist. Coalition commanders later estimated that blow-up fakes absorbed approximately 40% of Iraqi indirect fire during the ground campaign, allowing real coalition units to move with significantly fewer deaths. In 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, American and British forces continued using blow-up tricks. They deployed fake artillery batteries and tank platoons to draw Iraqi attention away from actual attack routes. The Iraqis, having learned from 1991 that coalition forces use fakes, sent ground scouts to verify targets before attacking. But this caution slowed Iraqi response times, giving coalition forces additional hours to establish positions. The trick worked even when the enemy knew tricks were possible because confirming whether a target was real or fake required time and resources. The technology proved itself again in 2022 when Ukraine faced Russian invasion. Ukrainian forces, desperately outnumbered and outgunned, used blow-up fakes extensively. They deployed fake HIMARS rocket launchers, blow-up tanks, and fake artillery positions throughout contested areas. Russian forces, relying heavily on satellite spy missions and drone surveillance, identified these positions and struck them with expensive precision-guided missiles. Spy experts later estimated that Russia spent hundreds of Caliber cruise missiles, each costing approximately $6 million, destroying blow-up targets that cost a few thousand each. Ukrainian soldiers moving the blow-up fakes between positions reported that Russian forces sometimes hit the same fake target multiple times before realizing it was fake. The Ghost Army concept, born in Kent in 1944 with Canadian soldiers inflating rubber tanks, was still saving lives and conserving military resources 80 years later. The broader lesson from Canada's Ghost Army went far beyond blow-up tanks and military tricks. It revealed something basic about modern warfare and war thinking. Traditional military power focuses on building more weapons, training more soldiers, deploying more firepower. Those elements matter, but the Canadian blow-up trick proved that perception management could be equally important. If you could make the enemy believe you had forces in a particular location, they would give real forces to counter that believed threat. Whether your forces were real or made of rubber and air became unimportant. The enemy's decisions were based on what their spy systems reported, not on actual reality. You could multiply your effective combat power without making additional real equipment simply by controlling what the enemy's spy missions observed. This understanding extended far beyond tanks and battlefields. In the information age, the side that controls the story often achieves war goals regardless of underlying physical strength. During the Cold War, both NATO and Warsaw Pact forces maintained elaborate trick programs. Entire fake divisions existed on paper and in carefully staged photographs. Real military units were hidden while fake installations drew enemy attention. The cost of maintaining a trick force was a tiny fraction of the cost of maintaining equivalent real forces. But the trick forced adversaries to spread their defenses thin, commit spy missions, and plan for threats that did not exist. Today, military tricks have evolved into areas that Corporal Henderson could never have imagined. Modern warfare includes cyberspace tricks, where fake network traffic suggests military communications that do not exist. Satellite images can be changed to show troop buildups that are not real. Social media accounts spread false information about unit locations and capabilities. Deepfake technology can create video evidence of military movements that never happened. The method has changed from rubber tanks to digital fakes, but the rule remains exactly what the Canadians proved in 1944. Make the enemy see false information through channels they trust, and they will act on that false information as if it were true. The story of Canada's Ghost Army carries one final important lesson about innovation and unusual thinking. The most effective solutions often come from unexpected places and unusual views. Lieutenant Thornton was not a career military officer or a weapons engineer. He was a theater stage manager who understood visual tricks and audience perception. Corporal Henderson was not a tank commander. He was a construction worker who understood materials and structures. When traditional military approaches to tricks failed, these unusual soldiers succeeded by applying civilian skills to military problems. The generals asked how to hide real forces or build better physical fortifications. Thornton and Henderson asked what German spy cameras could actually detect and how to create images that cameras would read as genuine military forces. That shift in view, that willingness to think about the enemy's observation systems, rather than just physical deployment of forces, made all the difference. The young Canadians who worked in muddy Kent fields inflating rubber tanks remind us that victory takes many forms. They never fired weapons in combat. They never stormed beaches under fire. They never flew dangerous bombing missions. But their work with air pumps and painted canvas, creating fake armies that existed only in German photographs and spy assessments, saved thousands of Allied lives and helped determine the outcome of the war's most important battle. In a world where information shapes decisions and perception drives strategy, those invisible warriors demonstrated that the most powerful weapons are sometimes the ones that change what the enemy believes, rather than destroying what the enemy has. Henderson and his fellow soldiers understood what many commanders initially did not grasp. Modern warfare is not fought only with steel and explosives. It is fought with information and perception. If you can control what the enemy's spy systems report, you can control where the enemy positions his forces. If you can make the enemy see fake threats, you can draw real forces away from actual battlefields. The blow-up tanks existed only as rubber shells filled with air, but they kept 2 German tank divisions away from Normandy for 7 critical weeks. Sometimes the weapons you cannot fire are the most effective ones. Sometimes the armies made of rubber and lies win more important victories than armies made of steel and bullets. The Ghost Army was never real, but it helped win the most important battle of the 20th century. And that makes it one of the most successful military units in history.